Hi, my name is Cathy Day, and I am here to talk to you today about the curriculum Vitae. And this is part of the Career Services web series that's recently been started by the Association of Writers and Writing Programs. Who am I to tell you stuff about CVs? Well, I've been teaching since 1997, so a good amount of time in two different MFA programs. And so I've helped a lot of people compose their CVs. As a member, I've been on quite a few search committees, and I've read and discussed with colleagues the merits of various kinds of CVs. I've had a couple of different jobs, and I've had to write many of these things and strategize, and it seems to have worked somehow magically that I got these jobs. And but I want to say, I am not the last word on these things by any stretch of the imagination. I'm sure that I'm going to say things today that people will take exception to and say, oh no, that's totally wrong. And please respond and share that information because I'm sure it can help a lot of people. So let me explain to you the format that I'm going to use today. I'm going to use a screen share. I'm just basically going to walk through a, um, a fake CV in Microsoft Word and kind of show you show you pointers about it. Feel free to pause and take notes as I do this. I think it's going to take about 45 minutes, maybe a little bit more. I'm going to talk about the structure of a CV, the different categories that you should definitely have, and how you should arrange them strategically. That's kind of the important thing about this, is that you have to assess what is the rhetorical situation that your CV is for, and what are the strategies so that you can tailor it. You should always tailor your CV for each particular kind of job that you're applying for. And remember that curriculum vitae means the course of my life in Latin. The CV that I use now is about 11, 12 pages long. I went back to my Vita from 2000 and it was 3 pages long. The longer you're in academia, the longer your resume. And that's one of the things about this, is that typically with resumes, you try to keep them short, but a curriculum vitae should reflect the arc of your professional career. So let me go out of here real quick and go to the CV. Okay. So there's a couple different, I invite you to use whatever means at your disposal to make your CV look however you would like it to look design-wise. This is the same CV, but it is arranged a little bit more artistically and uses a couple different kinds of fonts. And I'm just going to kind of go with a very simple CV that's in Times New Roman and follows a pretty basic structure. Be sure that the name on your CV should be your professional name, the name that you use to publish. My name is actually Catherine Day, but I publish as Cathy Day. So I would put Cathy Day on my CV, even though that's my legal name is a little bit different. You want to make sure that you have your home address and any other information that you think is pertinent, such as definitely your email address if you have a website so that they can check that out, and your phone number. If you have academic employment, please also include that. I just created a text box and stuck it in there so that it's right on the other side. And this signals to them that you're currently in an academic position. The first category should always be education. Now remember that when a committee member is looking at your CV for the first time, they're going to be asking themselves, is this person qualified for the job? So let's say that Luna Hartman is applying for a job to teach fiction writing and nonfiction writing at a university, and they are looking. The job said that you must have a terminal degree and you must have a book. So the person who's looking at this for the first time is just basically looking to see, is this person qualified? So as you can see, Luna got her MFA in Creative Writing Fiction in 2011 from the fictitious Lumiere University in Colorado Springs. This is the title of her thesis and short stories and who her director was. The reason that you put that down is that that is their assumption that that is the project that you're working on. And we can only imagine that maybe this is maybe a different project than the book that she published the next year. So that basically it outlines the project that you worked on. That's why you always mention that. But as you get a little bit further in your career, you eventually take off what your thesis was and who your director was. You should also mention where you went to undergraduate. The next category should be either teaching or publications. Definitely, if you're applying for a job at a liberal arts college, I advise you to go with teaching experience first. If you're applying at a research institution, go with publications first. If you don't have that many publications, then go with teaching first. You want whatever's on the first page of your CV to be strong. So that's what you need to think about. Oh, and before I forget, before I go into publications, I also want to say two things. Okay, one thing is you need to think about what you save your, how you save the document and what you call it. I've seen, as someone who's reviewed a lot of files, sometimes I'm looking at things digitally. And if I'm looking at 100 different applications and they're all just called CV, that it can be hard to find things and look for things. And so I recommend that you title your CV with your name and the date. For example, today is 3/1/2015. Don't put things like for my third tier job apps or anything like that. That might signal to them that you're not really serious, or the other kind of jobs that you're looking at. Also, you would like to eventually, once you get done, save it as a PDF. So remember that. And then the other thing I would mention is that you need to put in headers and page numbers. So the easiest way to do that, I think, is to, I'll go to the second page. Go to the second page and go to the right, and we're going to insert a page number. Right, don't show number on first page. And then I'm going to put in, let's see, it's a good idea to always have your CV have your name on it, because the pages can get lost, and also so that people in a meeting can say, on page 5 of the CV, you need to have that there. I recommend that you make the font be maybe slightly different than the font that you're using for your thing, maybe a little smaller. That doesn't really look exactly like I would like it to look, but that kind of gives you the picture. All right, so we'll go back to publications. Excuse my digression. One of the things that you should probably think about is when you are looking at a lot of these, the effect that you want your CV to have is you want it to make a good impression. You want it to make sense to the person who's looking at it. They need to be able to understand who you are almost at a glance. And a lot of it has to do with the kinds of things that you emphasize. You cannot use bullet points in a CV, but there are a lot of other things that you can do to make it clear, okay? So one of the things that you can do is, for example, moving things over so that the publications section stands out. And then we can see within that section there are books and anthologies, and we think about maybe moving those over. You want to use an MLA citation style for your publications. You want to put them in reverse chronological order. I have the paperback, the 2013 before the 2012, so I want to change that. I also recommend that you use the hanging indent feature. The way that this could look if you don't use that feature, I have it set up that way right now, but let me show you. If you do it with no special indentation, it just looks like this. And the MLA style features the indentation style, and I also think that it makes it harder to read when there's no white space. You want each individual citation to stand out. So we're going to go back. Let me just go Command Z. Okay. And then we see the anthology. And one thing I wanted to mention is that in terms of like the types of things that we can include in publications, let's think about the different kinds of things that we can publish in. We might publish in newspapers, such as op-eds or articles. We might publish like an essay as the Modern Love column in New York Times. We might publish something at salon.com or in a magazine like the Oprah magazine. And then there are journals. For academics, they're scholarly journals, but we have literary journals. And then among literary journals, there are both print and online literary journals. So I'm going to take that out there and just say that what you need to try to do is to make each of the different types of things that you publish be recognizable. So I'm going to move this over. I'm going to move these 3 journal titles over. Okay. So one of these is, and what I've tried to do here is show that Luna has published both short stories and essays in journals. One is called My Super Story, and it's a short story in Magazine of Distinction, volume number and issue, and she indicated that it's forthcoming. This is a very handy thing if something's not quite out yet, so you can still get it on your CV. However, do not ever lie. Do not ever inflate or fudge on whether or not something is forthcoming. One of the things that you have to do on a search committee, especially when you're towards the end of a search, is call references and sort of verify some of the stuff that's on a CV, so you don't ever want to be caught in a fib. So Luna also has the title of her essay, which was in Great Journal. You want to go ahead and put, if it was in a print magazine, go ahead and put the page numbers that it appeared on, because that's the MLA citation, and you don't want to wait till you're 15 years into your career like I did and have somebody say, oh yeah, although your journal publications need to have the page numbers, and then you have to look them all up. So much easier to just do it right away. And then Luna also has a short story in onlinemag.com. I went ahead and put in a fake hyperlink, which you can do if you like, depending on how they're reviewing it, and the date of publication, and that it was published online. I highly recommend that you try to have a balance of both print and online publications, especially when you're early in your career. And do not expect that the super hip journals or magazines or whatever that everybody's reading these days, all the people that you talk to, don't expect that is something that the committee is necessarily going to have heard of, that the English department that you're applying to, which might have people from other disciplines on it, that the dean of arts and humanities who's going to be looking at your CV will recognize. Remember that the rhetorical situation that you're in with a CV is that it is something that you're trying to speak to people outside your discipline. And there may be things about being a creative writer that we recognize as being really important. The hard thing is that the CV is actually a place where we have to sort of appeal to people outside of our own discipline. So just take that for whatever it's worth. And then Luna also has some book reviews, quite a few. In fact, so many that she decided to just say, I have published many book reviews on a regular basis from January 2000 to the present in these really high profile places. She doesn't even have them all. If you have just a few, you could list them, each one of them in that section. She also has done some pretty high profile interviews, one with Mary Gateskill and one with Kingsley Amis. So we're going to move those over. And I think I might just move those over too. And so that's her publication section. Now, remember I said that the job was for somebody in fiction and nonfiction? Now, it's true that up here in her books, she has published both fiction and nonfiction. She's published an essay here, a short story and an essay. So she's done that, and this is all nonfiction, the book reviews. But here's a different way. You can give the exact same information, but present it in a way that almost makes you look like a different kind of candidate. So here in the section for books, we could go in and change this, oops, yes, to hanging. And we have fiction and nonfiction published, and we do that the same thing here. And anthologies, we make it clear that that was a nonfiction publication. And here for journals, we have it, she has it divided. Here are the fiction that I've published in journals, and here's the nonfiction that I've published in journals. And also the book reviews could also be listed as nonfiction. Now, what that would do is signal to the committee, especially if they're looking specifically for somebody who can do both, what that signals is a little bit, it has a kind of subliminal effect. It makes you feel more assured that the candidate really does do both. Even though their primary genre, the genre that they got their degree in, might be fiction, it makes them seem like they could do both. So that's just something I wanted to mention that I think is remember that it's not about, the CV is fairly flexible, and you should think about what you put in and what you leave out, and how each way of presenting the information is for whatever situation that you're in. You're in control of that. The next section that we're going to talk about is, you can call it academic teaching experience, academic employment. The reason that I'm stressing the word academic here is that if you have done other kinds of teaching, such as working at an independent writing or literary center, or you've taught as a poet in the schools, or you've tutored or anything like that, that's all good experience, but you should put that under professional experience, but not, they want to know where you've been, what institutions of higher education have employed you. So Luna is an assistant professor of creative writing right now at Flyover State University, and she's listed the courses that she's taught. She's been an adjunct instructor. And we talk about like the curriculum vitae as the story of a life, or the course of your life. Luna went to Lumiere University from 2009 to 2011, where she taught these classes. Then she was an adjunct for a year, and then she got this job. One of the things that I see when I look at the way that her academic teaching experience is represented on here is that it's very common when you first get out of, when you only have your undergraduate or your graduate teaching experience under your belt, it's very common to see each semester that you taught it. See, like how these are each, like she's listed each semester that she taught a particular class. That's pretty common. I recommend that once you've been out of school for a while, that you take all of that out and just say that while you were there, you taught these classes. Once you've been out for a while, it doesn't matter that you taught a class 2, 3 times, 5 times. It just matters that you've taught it, and there's less emphasis on the number of times. I also recommend actually that you put these things in reverse chronological order, not chronological, numerical order. So you start with the highest level class that you taught and go down to the lowest level class. And if you have ever taught graduate classes, that you make sure that you emphasize that. That's something that really impresses a committee. So we're going to take out this stuff here, and be sure that you represent accurately the kind of, I'll call it the in-between job that you had, if you had them. As so many of you know, I mean, this is where so many creative writers are these days, is they are the adjunct instructor, or the instructor, or the lecturer, or the visiting lecturer, or the visiting assistant professor. And I think that it's really important to accurately represent the rank or the title at which you were hired, and not to inflate that. And also, it's important that even though it's incredibly unfair, and it's incredibly there's so many things that I could say about the contingent faculty crisis in this country, but the CV is not the place to talk about it, or to show to show that you are frustrated with that situation, neither or in your cover letter either. So this is just this is a professional document. So as to the best of your ability, try to keep that stuff off the page. And then I would probably go into the flyover state stuff. Take out these things here because that's not that important. And it's also common when people first get out of school that they might talk about how they taught each of these classes. Like if this is literally the only thing that you have is an explanation of maybe a way that you taught your classes, keep it to just maybe 2 or 3 lines if there's a particular focus or something original or special that you did. If there really wasn't, if you just basically were teaching the course that you had to teach, then I would just recommend just listing it. Okay, because otherwise it comes off like padding. So the next thing on the CV is that Luna put is awards and honors, because she was a notable essay in Best American Essays and a recipient of the AWP Interjournals Project. There are a couple other things. Now remember that it's really up to you. There's no specific order that these things have to be in. You probably want to, if you've done something really important like Best American Essays, which is a really cool thing, then you do want to kind of put that high up. If you haven't really gotten very many awards and honors, then I wouldn't put it there. Another thing that you'll often see on the CV is I'm just going to give you a lot of different ideas about what you can call this stuff. Okay, so I was looking at a friend's and she had panels, presentations, and public readings on her CV. Now that's a big, that's a big subcategory. So, big category, and then they had broken it down to academic conference presentations, workshops, panels, and lectures, and invited readings. The other thing is, rather than having a category with 3 items on it, just have presentations, have each one of them instead be like this. You could just have it like that, conference presentations. The other thing I would recommend that you do is that you highlight what your role on in the presentation was. Were you a panelist or were you a moderator? Did you propose the panel? And the reason that conference presentations are a good thing to stress is that remember that the benchmark for scholarship is peer-reviewed work. And the thing is that creative writing, we do some peer-reviewed, but mostly what we're doing is editorially reviewed. But conference presentations is a kind of achievement that's recognized quite easily by a variety of kind of people who might be looking at your CV. And so they'll want to know what your role was. So you want to mention that along with the title and all the other information about your conference presentation. Now you want to separate that because this is stuff where you had to submit a proposal and that had to be reviewed and then you got accepted or not accepted. That's different than doing something like doing workshops and panels and lectures. So we want to make sure that we keep those things separate, because it's when you start doing stuff like trying to stick, something where you were invited to speak in with your stuff where you had to be accepted to speak, that's when you can get into trouble. So in the next section, Luna has her workshops, panels, and lectures. And remember, and I wanted to point this out to you, she gave a guest lecture in Professor Ginger Granger's workshop in fiction class at Lumiere University on November 6th, 2010. Now, what that is basically, now maybe Ginger Granger had to go out of town for a day and she asked Luna to come teach her class for her, and that's really all it was. But that's still what that is, what that means to me reading this is that, I understand that might be the situation, but it also means that Ginger Granger thought that Luna was a responsible graduate student who could come in and teach her students something. She trusted her. So anytime that you are doing something in graduate school that is not what everybody else is doing, you're doing something where you were specially selected, it is something that you can think about putting on your CV. And here I noticed that I got some things out of reverse chronological order, so I'm going to move those up there. And there's a difference between leading a workshop, giving a lecture, doing a guest lecture, being a panelist with a bunch of other people. So I've got all those things there. But I wanted to show you what happens when you make a different choice, which is to list those things that you did like this. So here's another way that I've seen people do things. Like, here's the title of the lecture that I gave, and then say, oh, it was a guest lecture in Professor Ginger Granger's workshop. Here was the name of the panel. Here is the title of the workshop that I gave. The problem is that you're burying this stuff. You're burying the stuff that they're looking for. They're looking for, well, what were you doing? What was this thing exactly? That's what they're interested in. And so that's why I recommend that you do it this way. Maybe to you, the thing that you talked about is what matters to you most. But for the purposes of this document, I would say that what's more important is that they're more interested in what it is that you were doing there, what role you were playing. And then the last category here is invited readings of creative work. Now, there's a difference. I mean, I'm sure that all graduate students are at one point or another required to give a reading, well, as part of their thesis. That's not necessarily something that you want to count on your CV, because even though it's a public reading, every other person had to do it. So it's actually, try to think of it this way, that invited readings should be whenever you're invited to give a reading by somebody that you either don't know personally, or that you only know professionally. So here, Luna was read at the Tallahassee Arts Festival, and you want to give the date. I'm going to double space this because I think it makes it easier to read. The thing that happens a lot in our discipline is that we things that we do mean more when we are invited to be on a panel with somebody who has name recognition, when we are invited to give a reading with somebody who has name recognition. But you want to be careful on this document, because a chemist who's reviewing CVs, or the dean who's looking at your CV, who is a political science professor turned dean, like, a lot of those names aren't necessarily going to mean anything to them. I put ZZ Packer and Lori Moore here because I think those are names of writers that actually people might recognize, but otherwise you just want to say that you gave a reading. I also wanted to mention that, here we have, and this is kind of an interesting thing that I think we're going to probably see a lot more of, is what if you do give a reading that's a virtual reading? I think there's a difference between getting on YouTube or Facebook and recording yourself giving a reading and counting that as, quote, a public reading, versus being invited by somebody else, especially if it's a well-respected magazine that that is often in Best American Short Stories, that they invite you to give a reading. So I think that is something that you can count. Okay, so I hope that explains the readings. The next section on this version of this CV is service. As you can see, do you see? I mean, one of the reasons I left it this way is that I hope that you can see how incredibly hard it is to take in that information when it's given to you, kind of like that. So I'm going to move this over, and we remember that we don't want to use bullet points on a CV. So a thing that we can do instead is just format it with the other kind of paragraph. And then we see that Luna, and it would be a shame for that information for the eye to not be able to take it in, because Luna was the chair of a poetry search committee at Flyover State University, and that's a big job, and that's an important job. She's a member of the Creative Writing Area Committee and has served as a secretary and as a chair. That's, you want to indicate what your position was in the various committees that you might have been on. At some programs, and some creative writing programs, being asked to introduce a writer is, they consider that part of service, and that's another way that when you're in graduate school, I think you can find situations that you might have done something like that you should be able to count on your CV. Also doing something like this, being the reader for figuring out who's going to win the awards that year, or reviewing the portfolios of the teaching majors or things like that. That's all stuff that you can do outside the classroom that you can put on your CV. I think the biggest challenge in graduate school is you're very busy teaching, you're very busy writing, but you also need to show that you're a good departmental citizen as well, and trying to do as many things outside the class as possible will really help you stand out when you go to do your CV. So those are the things that that Luna does at Flyover State in her job, and then she's emphasizing, look, here's all the things I did when I was in graduate school as well. So she looks like a real leader on the page, which is a good thing. The other thing that she did, which is wonderful, was she was the discussion leader for the Common Read program at that school, which is pretty rare for graduate students to do that. So this would, if I was looking at this and I was looking for somebody who would be a really good hard worker and somebody who would really kind of roll up their sleeves and get involved in the life of the program and the department, this is definitely somebody that would look really good to me. One of the things that I noticed is that Luna decided to put service to the field on here as well. And that's actually, I do this, I think this is a good place to put, like, if you do any tenure reviews of people, you review manuscripts from other people. She has that. She was the review, the Lumiere review. She was on the staff. She was the nonfiction editor and then a reader. Personally, I think, and I guess it depends, this is one of those choices that you have to make. Do you put it as service to the field, or do you put it in a different category, perhaps under the next category, which is kind of a catch-all category where you can find a place for a lot of the things that you might have done even before you went to graduate school. You can call it the professional experience category. You can call it professional activities. I wanted to show you a couple of examples and how, depending on the kind of job you're applying for, you can kind of tweak this for your own purposes. So Luna did an external evaluation of Ivy College at the AWP Association of Writing Programs that do these periodic reviews, and she describes here exactly what she did on that. Now, typically on a CV, you want to be very careful about what you decide to describe narratively, because you do have a cover letter, so you really want to keep this kind of paragraphing, this paragraph description to a minimum, because otherwise it looks like padding. But I'm going to kind of talk about a couple things that I see on here. So she also has that she was an editorial assistant at a small press in Brooklyn, and she reviews manuscripts for them. She has that she was a writing center consultant at Lumiere and talks about it in quite a bit of depth. She emphasizes both the stuff that you could probably expect about working in a writing center, but also stuff like she trained new consultants to utilize social media to market the Writing Center's offerings, was part of a technology task force, so she's emphasizing a lot of stuff there. She's emphasizing that and describing the work that she did with a young writers workshop, a summer workshop, both teaching and also living in the dorms with the students, and working as the assistant to the directors at the place where she went to undergrad. So one of the things, like, that just is a big mishmash. I mean, what kind of sense does that make? All these different things. It's just like this this place to stick all this stuff you don't know what to do with. One of the things that I would do is try to break it down in terms of what things did you do that were administrative? What things have you done that were editorial based? What things have you done that were maybe community outreach based? Did you do things that were tutoring and teaching? This is also a good place to put things like invited blog posts, if you were invited to participate on somebody's blog. Now, what I'm going to do is just try to move some of this stuff around. I consider this to be an administrative role. And let's say that the job that you're applying for, they say that they want somebody who can direct their writing program, then that would be actually a good reason to maybe go into some detail about the administrative roles that you've played and the different things that you've done. If, let's see, maybe the job is to work in a writing program and then also to direct or create a young writers program, a young writers workshop at that school, then that would be a really good thing to mention. Here is working as the assistant to the director of a program. That's an administrative or arts administrative kind of position. So I think you can see, like, it depends on the job. Like, if the job description doesn't say anything about administrating, or it doesn't say anything about needing somebody to run their undergraduate literary magazine, then you might want to just list these things rather than explain them. Maybe just explain when you feel that they really probably want to learn as much about you doing that work as possible. These are some things like, well, where do things like this go? All right, so the importance of thread. A blog post for a blog called Bending Genre. So I looked it up, and Bending Genre was actually an anthology, a nonfiction anthology, and they created a blog so that people could talk about issues related to nonfiction. The danger of putting something like this as a nonfiction publication, as an essay, is that some nonfiction writers might say that that diminishes the value of a well, like a more fully fleshed out, full-fledged essay, and that maybe things that you publish that are published on a blog might be something that you put in a different place, such as here. I think that showing that you're a good literary citizen and that you're trying to contribute to conversations is definitely a good thing. You might even want to call that as one of the categories on your CV. But you also need to decide, like, when is it scholarship? When is it a publication that a scholar is going to deem quote worthy, and when is it not? So here's another one. Here's a publication, what is it? I'm going to put a space here. The Missouri Review was working on a celebration of Short Story Month, and Luna wrote something about the famous story Lori Moore's How to Be a Writer. And so this is something that she's listing in a different place than in her nonfiction publications. Let's say that you were interviewed by Neil Conan, something about quitting your day job. You were the subject of a National Public Radio Talk of the Nation interview. Well, wow, that's pretty cool. But where do you put something like that? Because it's not a publication of yours, but it's a situation where you have been featured. That is something that I'm going to show you here in a minute. You might want to think about the extent to which when you have a book come out, there's a kind of publicity train that you are on. There are book reviews about your book that come out, interviews with you, and just general publicity. And you might want to think about putting that in a different place than you put your own publications. That there are places where you are the subject of reviews, interviews, and publicity, and you want to put that in its own place, versus where you are the one writing the reviews and doing the interviews and doing publicity for others. So as you can see here, this interview with Lori Moore in Lumiere Review, that's something that we might decide to put under publications up here. We already went through that. Let's go back here. Book reviews. Did we do that? Yes, we did. Right here. Okay. I'm going to stick that there, and then I'm going to go back. Sorry if it gets you dizzy. Okay, so let's say also that Luna Hartman is the creator of a blog called My Big Fat Blog, an online hub about body positivity. Where would something like that go? And I think this is something, especially if it's a blog that you maintain that has a pretty good readership, I think this is something that you could stick in editorial, actually. It's work that you're doing, especially if it's a hub and people are submitting things and you're curating something. It's something that you could probably talk about here and maybe provide a short explanation about what it is that you're doing. Now, this might be a good thing to mention, especially if you feel that the job might involve you teaching digital publication skills or digital writing skills to undergraduates or graduate students. I think that's something that we're going to probably see much more of. So I'm going to put that there. The interview, we already talked about where that goes. The things about, like, here's all the places where my books have been reviewed. That's something that you might put here under reviews, interviews, and publicity, and just list. My book was a summer pick for Publishers Weekly. It was reviewed in all these places, and that's great, which is different than, for example, look here. What if you were the subject of an interview about the rise of the body positive writer, and it was published in a book called Fat Studies in the 21st Century by Northwestern University Press? That's a pretty big deal, and you probably want to list that people are doing actual scholarship about your work, which is different than getting a book review in your local newspaper. One is coverage, and one is like critical interest, and so you want to make sure that you show the committee that you know the difference between those two things. Let's see. I've got some other examples here. If you're not sure how to cite these things, I just recommend that you go to the Purdue OWL online, and you can see how to pretty much cite anything. Other categories that you might want to have: fellowships and residencies. If you've gone to Sewanee or Breadloaf or had a residency at McDowell or something like that. If it's a job where you think you're going to be doing some kind of community outreach, maybe you want to make that be a whole category on its own rather than a subcategory of something else. If you're working on a book, let's say that the job, like I said, is a fiction and nonfiction job. Or actually, let's do it this way. Let's say the job is a nonfiction job, but you got your degree in fiction. Creative nonfiction has actually only been a degree that you could get for not very long. My degree is in fiction, and there was no such thing as a creative nonfiction degree when I went to school. So you might want to put in your works in progress. Yes, I've published fiction, but the book I'm working on right now is nonfiction. Especially, you don't want to, and I've seen this happen, the job that you're applying for, let's say, is a job in fiction, and you've published a book of fiction, but in works in progress, you put that you're actually working on narrative journalism. That would be bad because they need you to go through, they want to hire you and put you through their system, which exists as a fiction writer. And so if you say that the thing you're working on right now is nonfiction, that could cause some hiccups. So I would recommend that you either just don't say what your work in progress is, or think about whether or not that's really that job is the right fit for you. You can have a short statement of like basically what your research and teaching interests are. That's something I see a lot. If you have representation, you should definitely list who your agent is if you have one. For your references, you want to list them in the order that you would want them to be called in. Your best, the person who knows your teaching, your scholarship, and your service the best, you should list first. It used to be that you were supposed to only put their phone number and not their email, but increasingly schools are taking the phones away from faculty, so maybe you want to just go ahead and put their email address on there as well. So Luna has Pauline Yetters. Now what this means, I want you to note this, is that she is at Flyover State, and she has a reference from somebody at Flyover State. That means that her department knows that either somebody in her department knows that she's on the job market, and that's kind of a good thing to know how someone is doing in the job. It means that especially if they're not doing well and there's some sort of problem and they don't have any kind of reference coming from that place, it can be hard to discern, like, well, what's going on? Is there something wrong? So that's very reassuring to see that she has something from Flyover State. And then she has one of her MFA faculty, one of her mentors, and then one good old boy Jones, another person from her MFA. Eventually, you get to a place where you don't need the recommendations from your MFA teachers anymore, because you've got colleagues and other people that you've sought out professionally to speak on your behalf. So I hope that helps to explain. I thought I maybe might show you. This is my CV, like from what year is this? 2000. So this is from 15 years ago. It was 3 pages long. Here's my Hotmail address, which doesn't exist anymore. And I used lines, which some people say you shouldn't use, but I did it. So you can kind of see this is before I had a book published. I listed things by anthologies, periodicals, and nonfiction and periodicals. I had a section for fellowships and awards, the places where I'd taught and what I'd taught there, the places where I'd given readings, and then I had a big catch-all category for professional activities where I had my presentations and my contests that I judged, advising. I just had this big catch-all category, and then there are my references. So it was only 3 pages long. Everybody starts out somewhere. I hope that this was a helpful thing for me to run through with you. It's not perfect because I'm just going really fast. But before I go, I wanted you to make sure that if this was helpful to you, I hope that you'll tell people and share it with others, and tell me what other things you might like to know. I'm always happy to answer more questions. And tell AWP that, that you liked it if you did. I hope that this was helpful. Remember that a CV is a story that you tell about yourself, and I hope that you tell the most engaging and productive and